You know the Magna culture, right? Nobody works for me. You people work with me. I'm working for you. The history of mankind has always been dominated by the golden rule. Here's the gold makes the rule. But I don't want to be dominated by anyone. If I feel that strong, I should not be able to dominate somebody either.
Hello there, I'm Richard Dolan, and I'm sitting with a very dear friend, and now yours, Frank Stronach, a titan of industry, one of Canada's most iconic billionaires, businessmen, and philanthropists. Frank, so good to sit with you again.
Great to be here.
You know, Frank, I have to share with you a quick little story, because as I work with you for now a few years, not just on your life's work, but your life's legacy, wanting to make a difference for Canada and its economic future, I sit more often now with friends and recognize the need to ring the bell. You see, I sat with a dear friend, Chris, who had just returned from overseas. And as we sat, we began to review and reflect on the state of Canada's affairs. And we couldn't help but notice that politics just doesn't seem to be working. But I was overwhelmed equally with grief and anger. Grief because the country has gone in the direction it's gone, but anger because I don't know where to start. We don't know where to start. And I've heard you say this before, Frank, and we're going to start here, where you've often said that the political system is just simply out of whack. Well, what do you mean by that, Frank?
Well, it's out of whack. I mean, everything's out of whack if it's not properly run, right? Okay. It's if we got too much poverty, if we got too many sick, too many hungry, it's obviously it doesn't work. Okay, because the plain fact is the living standard's gone down at least 50% over the last 50 years. So we all know that's a fact, right? But nobody's ringing the alarm bells. And it's gone further down. So the only thing what's growing is the debt's growing, the bureaucracy is growing, and the imports are growing. That's like a freight train going down the hill with no brakes on.
That's a powerful analogy, to think of a train going downhill with the entire population on it with no brakes. But you said something to me once before, that you've been observing a steady decline in the standard of living in Canada for now 70 years. And I'm sure you've heard of the metaphor, the boiling frog theory, where at first, if you start simmering that live frog just ever so slightly, it doesn't really notice it's actually being boiled until it's dead. It feels the same way, 70 years to notice how bad it's become. How bad is it, Frank?
Unfortunately, it's very bad, right? Because the debt's growing like crazy. Who's going to pay it back? And how we do I pay it back? Okay? The signs are all there, right? It's not, and I'm quoting many times, when the first computers came on the market 50 years ago, the slogan was, if you got one of those computers, you could eliminate an office floor in a high-rise office building. But now when I look around in the cities, there's 20 times more high-rise office buildings. There's no question. What do they do in there? They don't make products in there. They create regulations in there. You have regulations, and you have regulators which will regulate regulators.
It's interesting, though, because it then begs the question, which brings me back to how we started this conversation. You know, as a Canadian citizen, I was born and raised in Toronto. I don't recognize the country. And let's not talk about the population or the policies, the bureaucracies, the red tape that really stifles innovation and entrepreneurship. But you've often spoken about a chamber of citizens. Where did this idea come from? Because maybe that's where change can begin. What's your thoughts on that, Frank?
Well, sometimes you can look back in history and say, who did things right, or what could we learn from history, right? So when I look back in history, one politician stood out, which was Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill, especially in his later years, said many times, he was a very civilized, but he used some good words. He said, "God damn, Parliament doesn't work. There's only politicians in Parliament. The mandate of a politician is," he says, "to be elected or re-elected. So the problem is the country is managed via political reasons instead of socioeconomics. So he says we need a chamber of citizens in Parliament to balance out the politicians. But that's too cumbersome. I think we could use small business in Canada. That could be the chamber of citizens. Small business. Small business has always been the backbone of Canada, practically the backbone of any country. So that's small business play a great role in society.
I agree. My personal observation, you started off as a small business owner with one workbench and a single employee, and you grew your own company to 180,000 employees. So it's not about being big, it's about understanding the significance. That sounds to me, Frank, that you're honoring the entrepreneur's spirit. They take on risk, they borrow money, they raise capital, they hire people, they pay their taxes, they provide a service. Some even build products. But looking at small businesses, Frank, I've got to be honest, I feel like they feel a little disempowered, a little bit disenchanted, maybe even a little bit deflated. They don't know how to come together. What would be your advice to them?
Well, the small business, the advice would be to get them the straight goods, right? What happens in the country, right? So basically, small business is brought to a standstill via the bureaucracy, right? They are wound up in so much red tape, they can't move. It's like the economic arteries, like they're full with cholesterol, right? So basically we gotta wake up small business and say, and most of all, like people love their kids, right? So that's usually that's the primary concern when they have kids. Gee, do they have the right job? Do they have, can they make the right living? And could they run the family, et cetera, right? Those are very important points. And so, but the way things are coming along, there is no future for our younger generation, right? Okay, because years ago, a small business, or I would call it entrepreneurs, some done very well, right? And a lot of students or kids said, "Gee, I would like to do well as such and such a person," right? But that's now falling by the wayside, right? Because large business doesn't like small business because they're more competitive. And the bureaucracy is catering to large businesses, right? Because they have a lot of staff, they can afford to entertain, the bureaucracy, and we get different models, right? We get different structures. So that's the dilemma. So the dilemma is, first of all, in society, you can only bring about change. The timing is very important. What do I mean by timing? People don't want to change if the fridges are full, if their living standards are great. Why would you change, right? Okay, but the living standard, the fridges are going to be half empty, so the pain factor will set in quite severely over the next year, right? And I think it's very important that we have a civilized approach, that we don't go wild and want to maybe do some changes. We need a civilized approach, that we can do it, that we can make changes in a civilized way. So
I think that's a great way to segue into where we start. So as Chris and I sat and we thought to ourselves as as fathers and as leaders and as business owners, it's such an overwhelming concern about the future of Canada with the debt, with the bureaucracies, with the red tape, and with the rising tide of concern and competition. Where do we start? It sounds to me that the Chamber of Citizens comprised of small businesses, it really begins with a new conversation. And this is likely what you've come to call your charter of economic rights and freedoms and responsibilities here in Canada. Can you speak to that a little bit, Frank?
Well, I've always said the human charter of rights alone is not sufficient. We have to fortify it with an economic charter of rights. Economic charters of rights will lead to economic democracies, and economic democracies are the basis for democracy itself. You cannot have democracy unless you get economic democracies, okay? Let me put that in a more simplified way, right? What I would call the grassroots language. All politicians agree, all business people agree. If the economy doesn't work, nothing else will work. If the economy doesn't work, you cannot feed the hungry. You cannot look after the most fragile people, the elderly, the sick, and the handicapped. But we do not talk, strangely enough, what drives the economy. The most important subject is the economy, the economy, the economy. The economy is driven by three forces: smart managers, hardworking employees, and investors. The message I want to get across loud and clear is, without workers, you can't make a profit. It's so clear, it's so simple. Okay? But I think why we don't teach it in schools is the world has always been dominated by the golden rule. The people which have the gold make the rules. Now you don't see the rulers no more. They might be in Hawaii. They might be in Beverly Hills. They might be in Monaco. I would call them the financial elite. The financial elite do not want to share the profits with the working class. That's the dilemma. That's the golden rule. How can we dismantle the chains of dominations? Not via violent revolutions, via revolution of the mind, via supporting an economic charter of rights. That's a revolution of the mind.
This is fantastic. I mean, one of the things that really resonate with me, and I'm sure for those who are listening and watching, is your relationship to an interpretation of economic freedom. You know, you've often said that if you are not economically free as a person, you're not really a free person. And that makes complete sense. We're only subject to taxation and rules and responsibilities and licenses and restrictions. It feels like you're really, truly shedding light, Frank, on how small businesses joining a conversation really commences a movement. Well, what do you envision for that? Is this where the new wave common sense
comes in? Well,
let's
define what economic freedom would mean, right? Okay. That's a strong statement. So the minimum standards because if you're not economically free, you're not a free person. So what are the minimum standards to be economically free? The minimum standards in Canada is if a Canadian woman or a Canadian man has worked for 30 years, they should have enough accumulated that they own their own house or condo, mortgage-free, and have at least $300,000 in the bank to subsidize their old age pension and choose their own road to happiness for their remaining years. How many people do you know which would fall in that category? You know, have no mortgage on their homes and have $300,000 in the bank account. So there's got to be something wrong. We have advanced in technology to such an extent, incredible. Technology basically should serve society, but it doesn't. You know, it serves the financial elite because the technology gave them incredible monetary power. and the accumulation of monies. So we got to take a look at that, right? That's the problem. So the technology has not served mankind, has served call it a financial elite.
Well, those who own the businesses, the corporations, as you've called them, the financial elite, where they've eliminated jobs, they've created efficient margins, they've made more money. And there's nothing wrong with capitalism. I think capitalism is good. But you've often spoken about capitalism and the state of it here, not just in Canada, but the world. Can you speak to that a little bit more, Frank? What your thoughts on capitalism and the state of it is today?
Well, basically, we have two economic systems kind of growing, right? One is the communistic system, as practiced by China and Russia. There we see we have 10% of the population is the military. Another 10% of the population is what I would call the super bureaucrats. So you have 20% of the population tell the 80%, look, don't cross the line. Yes, I think the working class lives better, have maybe better access to food and living quarters, but freedom is... we in the West, we are known to freedom. People give their lives for freedom, right? Okay, as we can see in Russia, how many die in prisons, right? Okay, because they criticized, they wanted to, they brought forward that freedom is very important, right? Okay, and also in China, right? Many people lost their life, right? Okay, so. I think the financial elite is somehow waking up, because if we don't make capitalists out of the workers, the capitalistic system has no chance to survive. So how can we make capitalists out of the workers? First of all, we're not preaching to take away from the rich. All what we are preaching is we must let workers participate. When you bake the economic pie, everybody will get a bigger slice. It's an amazing thing. When I put in the economic charter of rights at the Magna Corporation, which I kind of created from scratch. When I put in the economic charter of rights, which it's the most important principle in the economic charter of rights was we predetermine what we do with the profits. 20% of the profits went to the shareholders. 10% of the profits went to the workers. Approximately half they got in cash, half in shares. That's over and above their wages. 6% went to management. Management had very low base salaries. 7% went to research. Research is the foundation for the future. And 2% went to charity. When I put in this economic charter of rights, our profits climbed 40% the first year, 100% the second year, and 200% the third year. The message I want to get across is when you let workers share in a tangible way in the profits, you create an energy of untold proportions, because workers on the front line, they can see things, how to make better and cheaper, right? So when you let them participate, you open up their mind. It's an incredible story, right? And we have a story, a practice this kind of structure, right? So we could learn from examples, right? So,
well, the best example, Frank, is the example you set. I mean, when you look at Magna, you turned employees into capitalists. You turned shareholders into partners. You shared the profits. This is why the phenomenon of what Magna wasn't just a business. It wasn't just a factory. It wasn't just an industry leader. It became a new standard for business. And I think it's a standard that we can actually learn from. That's what I sense about this whole conversation.
Furthermore, I want to point out Magna was an association of small companies. I left. I did not allow that companies have more than 300 employees. We had 2 or 3 companies which were bought, which had more, right? Okay. And so anyway, but we had over 400 factories which had less than 300 employees. So they could run, all the managers could run under the corporate umbrella if they saw an advantage, and they could stay outside of the corporate umbrella when they saw a disadvantage. Furthermore, a manager could not be fired. It could only be fired if he broke the law and if he didn't make a profit for 2 years. Those are the only reasons. So it means those small companies run independently, okay, and to have an association, it just was a powerful force, right? Yeah. And I had sometimes managers come to me and say, "Frank, I want to make more monies." I said, "That's nice to hear. That's a good sign. You're thinking the right way." So but there's no problem here. You could make more monies, right?
Sure.
All you have to be smart. Well, they said, "You're stifling me from making more monies because you only allow me to have 300 employees." I said, "You not listen." I said, "If you be smart, you make more monies." So finally, I had to tell them, "Look, if you replace yourself, if you groom the assistant manager and will become the manager and you replace yourself, I give you an ongoing cut of the profits for your life. And plus I give you the monies that you can open up a new factory and get a cut." So I had managers which replaced themselves maybe 10, 15 times.
Wow.
They made 10 million or 15 million, right? That's huge, okay? But that's huge for what I would call the skilled trade. So the skilled trade is very important, right? A country, call it, a farmer cannot produce food unless he's got seed. A country cannot produce products unless they got skilled labor. We have totally neglected skilled labor. It's totally gross neglect by the politicians not to keep on. We had a great system where students were exposed to the skilled trade. Okay, and we got to get that back again. There's been so much damage done to the economy, right? Okay, gross neglect. So anyway, part of the point 6 in our economic chart of rights got sub-principle, part 6 is, which says high school should stop at grade 10, and students should be exposed to grade 11 and grade 12 to skilled labor. I believe that's a great win for the students, because it gives them extra knowledge, and it's a great win for society, so we can make products. Okay, so right now we got to rely on imports. Anytime a country is importing more than exporting, they have a problem. The economy doesn't work. So we have a major problem. Okay, but we got to be very civilized about it. We should really talk. Is it right that a politician, has the right to re-elect themselves? Okay, no, it shouldn't be. And Winston Churchill pointed that out. I think one mandate or one period would be enough. To be in politics, to be a politician should be an honor. It should be that you want to serve your country because you have accumulated knowledge. Might it be a great sports person or artistic or medication, but definitely the economy to accumulate to accumulate monies, because it does take monies to feed the hungry, to look after hospitals, etc., right? So I think for a politician, one period would be enough to serve the country, and then they could go back and make more monies.
Yeah.
Okay. But one period, it would be great. Like, then the politicians got to go out and say, look, we got to live with that structure we created in Parliament. It was kind of stupid.
Yeah. You know, when I listen to you, Frank, and I know our conversations, please go ahead, please.
But it's got to be, I don't want to hammer it now, and it's the fault of the politicians alone. It built up over many years because I had many prime ministers on our board and ministers as nice people, wanted to do well, but they were trapped in the system. We got to change the system.
Well, this is where I'll interrupt you, because for the first time ever, Frank, I'm going to say something I've never said before. In hearing you speak, I feel like it's not just changing the system, it's starting a conversation, but it's shifting the mindset. Because as I rewind you a little bit, and as I hear your interactions with your former managers, the ones you told to replicate themselves and build themselves a network of factories, people you provided money to start their own factories and earn an override or carried interest in those factories. Here's my point. What you've done is you understood how to motivate ordinary people to be extraordinary entrepreneurs inside of a construct. And you, I think, see that the average Canadian business owner can operate the same too, because they too have a piece of this economic pie we call Canada. We all own a piece of our fair share of the debt, but we also own a fair share of the piece of the upside. Should we turn the country around? Should we get it to start making things again, training skilled labor, investing the right attention into all of our people? Because I think that's what you learned, and that's what you taught by the way you led at Magna. You turned every single person into a vested interest holder. Everybody on the floor, whether they cleaned the floors or whether they worked on the floors, they all had a piece of skin in the game. Would you not agree?
Well, society came a long way, from the caveman to the hunter and hunted, to the kings and to the servants. And now what we have basically bosses and unhappy employees. So I changed the system. I eliminate bosses. Yes, there must be people which have more responsibility than others, right? But not a boss, right? Okay. So it's the system what they got to change. And I've been very fortunate. Maybe it was at the right place at the right time with the right ingredients, right? Because I always say it doesn't matter how smart you are. If the stars are not aligned, things don't work, right? So I've been blessed, right? And so so basically I focused on the system, what we got to do. And the system would be to improve democracy. Most of all, a country or the world cannot exist, if relative few have all the capital, right? If the divide between the very rich and the working class is too wide, it just does not work, right?
No,
okay,
you're completely correct.
So basically, an economic charter of rights would eliminate poverty, and at least 2/3 of Canadians. When I say 2/3, 2/3 of Canadians get up early in the morning, work hard, and make some money so they can live in
dignity
greatly and help their family. And I guess if with an economic charter of rights, the 2/3 would be economically free, we will create such a strong middle class of untold proportions. And the strong middle class would try to help the other 1/3 to do better and bring it down maybe to 5%, right? Maximum 10%, where people, for one reason or the other, fall sick, or kid falls off a tree, gets a broken back. There's so many people eating the wrong stuff. There's so many, life is, you got to be lucky if you go through not being damaged, right? Okay. So anyway, by have better education, right, we could bring down, call it right now, 1/3 of Canadians, for one reason or the other, they're handicapped, right? But we could, with the proper education, we could bring it down. That will come down to maybe 5% or 10%, right?
Yeah, just for clarity.
That's what I would call a balanced society.
Yeah, for clarity, I mean, when you say handicapped, I know you mean financially handicapped. That's for one. But for two, Frank, you're a grandfather. I don't know about you, but with technology the way it is today, I haven't seen any kids climbing a tree in a very, very long time. So I don't think there's any kids jumping out of trees and getting hurt, to be quite honest. But with all kidding aside, because I know you get my joke, what I really love about this conversation today as we wind it down is that this is not just a movement. This is not just a hobby for you. This is not just, quite frankly, a passing conversation. This is a mission of yours. You really want to take all those years you built one of the most desirable business models in the world, we call Magna, and apply that same thinking, that same ideology that worked for thousands and thousands of people. And by the way, not just the tens of thousands you employed, but the hundreds of thousands of others that benefited from owning the stock and playing a part in the Magna ecosystem, but bringing it to life right here at Canada to apply that same thinking, that same ideology, that same vision, that same blueprint. And I want to say thank you. Thank you on behalf of my family, but more importantly, Canadians who now have something to lean into, to learn more about, and to see how they can actually play their small part in a very big challenge that we all can, in fact, absolve. Would you agree?
Well, we have to change the system, and we have to go back, right? I mean, how did that happen, right? And because we can only make changes if we start to realize how did the problems happen, right? Okay. So, but it's got to be civilized, right? I mean, and but the very key is, I think the politicians, one term, right? I mean, if you look, we all like to make some money that we can live that we can live a great life, etc., right? I mean, to serve 4 years the country, I think that's a noble thing to do. Okay, and I think you'd be better when you go back in business and increase the business, because the economy would function better then, right? So it's the economy. But you cannot have a few people benefit from the economy via great technology or whatever. Technology must serve society. Politicians should serve society, should serve the country, not serve their own interests. So we gotta think that it's nuts to have more terms, right? In politics, it should be strange. It should be stupid. Okay, for the benefit of society, we have to change the system. We gotta bring, the public has not been educated, right? Because again, it's the golden rule. Okay. So it's fundamentally, there's so many things basically wrong. Like I can bring it up over and over. The politician should have one term, and it should be an honor to serve society. Okay, but now they want to be in and do all the things. Look, a prime example, like a month ago, the federal government, the provincial government, and Ontario got together and say, we got to do something that people could buy homes cheaper. They said the the charges to get the permits, right, which are done on a municipal level, right, they're very high. And the federal government, the provincial government said, we're going to pay for that. What does that mean, we got to pay for that? They're printing more monies, quite many billions, right? But in fact, the bureaucracy will be grown in the municipalities, right? Because they get fed more and more monies. So it's the services to get your permits, right? The bureaucracies and the thing are beyond anything, right? Mm-hmm. Because you see it more, because you deal on a daily level. But then you got the provincial bureaucracy and the federal bureaucracy. It's just, let me go back when 40 years ago, or 35 years ago, when I opened up my first business in Toronto, I'm a tool and die maker by trade. I put a sign up, tool and die making open for business. I didn't need any permits. I went out, so I had $5,000 saved up when I came in 1954. And 3 years later, I had $5,000. And for $5,000 in 1957, you could buy a house or a small farm. Mm. I rented a building like 3 times the size than this room here, right? Bought a few used machines, and out I went hustling. I worked in a factory. They said, I'm very good in solving problems. If I can't solve them, you don't have to pay me.
Wow.
Obviously, I solved problems because after 1 month, I hired somebody. I hired an employee. After 1 year, 10 employees. After 2 years, 20. Mm-hmm. And I think that, again, is a learning block. For me, it was an evolutionary block, right? Because when my foreman told me he wants to start his own business, right? Mm. So I said, holy smokes, I'm going to lose my foreman. So that evening I was talking to myself, if that foreman's got to leave me, that would stifle my growth. What bothered me more was, if that foreman's got to leave me, I got to do all the work myself. I didn't like that. The third reason was, if I hire a new foreman and I don't show him how his business is run, I still got to do all the work. But if I show a new foreman how business is run, after 1 or 2 years, he will start out his own. I made it to an advantage of myself and to society, right? Because the next day I said to my foreman, look, why don't we build a new factory? I own 1/3, I own 2/3. He said, you mean it? I said, yes. He went right away to a lawyer, wrote it down. Guy worked like crazy. That was his factory. So I said, gee, business is easy. So over the next 5 years, I duplicated that, right? The first model. So after 5 years, I had 6 factories, right? Huge cash flow. Huge, But then it became philosophical and say, if I engage the employees too, I may even make more monies.
As I'm making notes here, I can't help but say this. There's never enough time in a conversation with you, Frank. There's so much insight. It's so easy and simple to understand that, based on your incredible history and your life and the story that emboldens and has been emboldened by, given the history that you have at Magna, there's so much we can learn from you. There's so much we can do. You've already done it. I know we have to do this again another time. We'll continue the conversation.
I should make a few more comments, right?
Sure, of course.
That's why it's so important. The future of Canada is in the hands of small business. Basically, I want to wake up small business. You love your kids. We got to do something, Naturally, they would ask, look, how does an economic charter affect me? Or what's in for me? Fair enough, right? So basically, Economic Charter of Rights says we got to free small business from all the bureaucrats, cut the red tape, and eliminate the business tax. Because small business makes very little business. The aim is to grow, By growing, they hire more employees, then the employee pay a wage tax, and governments make more taxes this way. Okay, so it's such a simple thing here. Okay, I stumbled over it, right? Occasionally, we all lucky it sometimes, right? So I stumbled over it, and I say, that this works great, right? Okay, so it's the system we got to change because we have too much poverty accumulating, and the living standards are still going further down. But most of all, if we don't change it, we might get the communistic structure would set foot in North America, huh? Okay? We don't want to destroy the capitalistic system. We have to harness the capitalistic system. We encourage the capitalistic system to have all the freedom for small companies. Small companies are companies with 300 employees. So they can totally operate under the free enterprise system, right? Or the capitalistic system. But when the small companies grow to larger companies, then the capitalistic system needs harnessing. The profit should not be taken by a few, right? Okay, it's got to be shared among the employees, because without employees, you can't make a profit, right? So anyway, we can do it in a civilized way. We can reduce, the bureaucracy. It should be reduced by about 60% by having a payout, a very fair payout of a 5-year deal payout for the bureaucrats, right? And if they find a job, they get in the private sector, they get a bonus. It could be done in a very civilized way, but we must. The political system we must change because it does not really bring democracies, right? Only economic democracies will bring democracies to society to eliminate poverty. Okay, the key is we got to wake up the small businessman to join the new wave common sense business association, because you can only, in a democracy, you can only bring change via democratic structures. Okay, so the new wave common sense business association with the vehicle, this is where businesses should unite in there. Small business, large business, they should unite in there and say, look, we cannot give the politician a totally free hand. We must put a discipline on when they can print monies. That's the very key.
Well, that's the vision, but that's the blueprint. Yes. If the Canadian Economic Charter of Rights and Responsibilities is the spirit of the conversation, the new wave, common sense business association is the blueprint. That's how small business owners can get involved. That's where they can be engaged. That's where their voice can be heard. That's where we can unify as a great country again. I trust that you agree.
Yes, that's we gotta spread the message. The New Wave Small Business Association the country's in their hands. Get involved for the sake of the younger generation. And Canada has always been such a great country. And I think the politicians mean well, but they trapped themselves in the system. We got to change the system.
You got it. Franks, thank you so much for the time today in the conversation. This has been a great conversation, yet again, with our very own Frank Stronach. If you want to learn more about the Canadian Economic Charter of Rights and Responsibilities, you can write us and get a copy of the very thing that you should be reading right now. From his book to the white paper and short summaries, we invite you to investigate it further. If you want to learn more about how to get involved with the New Wave Common Sense Business Association, we'd love to hear from you. Whether you're just a one-man show or a 10-man shop, regardless of size, your voice matters. It's time to ring the bell. Join the conversation with Frank Stronach so together we can make our Canada great again.